My name is Edward Mulligan, and I am 76 years old. I live alone in a one-story brick house on the edge of a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where everything shuts down by 7, and the grocery store cashier still knows your name, even if your own family forgets it. It used to be a good house, the kind that held warmth, laughter, life. Now it is a hollow space, echoing with the ghosts of routine. My wife, Caroline, passed away almost 6 years ago. Stroke, sudden, final. We had been married for 49 years. Not perfect years, not without arguments or silences, but she was the only person in the world who knew the contours of my heart without needing a map. After she died, something in me collapsed. Not just grief, a kind of quiet erasure. Like I was slowly being rubbed out of the story. The house is clean, always clean. I keep the windows washed, the dishes done, the yard trimmed. I wake up every morning at 6 because I always did, even when there's no longer a reason. I boil 1 egg, make 1 cup of coffee, toast 1 slice of bread. I read the paper even though I already know what's in it. The TV murmurs in the background, more for company than content. Some nights I fall asleep with it still on, the voices from the late-night infomercials softly talking me into unconsciousness. I don't dream about much anymore. I think that happens when you stop being the center of anyone's life. My son Alex lives 2 hours away in Columbus. He used to call once a week, Sunday mornings, 10 minutes tops, like a chore to check off. Lately it's more like once a month, if that. He has a wife now, Jenna. No children. They both work in tech, something with software, something remote and important. Whenever I ask about it, I get the same answer. It's complicated, Dad. You wouldn't really understand, maybe I wouldn't. But I understand when someone wants you to stop asking. I remember when Alex was little, how he used to run into my arms after school, how he'd leave sticky fingerprints on the fridge, how he once cried for an hour when I threw out a broken toy truck. I wasn't a perfect father, no one is, but I was present. I went to his games, I helped with homework, I sat beside him when he was sick. Caroline used to say I was too soft with him, that I gave him too much. Maybe I did. Maybe that's why it hurts more now that he's pulled away. The last time Alex and Jenna came over was 9 months ago. They stayed for under an hour. Jenna brought gluten-free muffins and spent the visit staring at her phone. Alex looked around the house like it embarrassed him. At one point, he said, "Dad, don't you think it's time to downsize? This place is too big for you now." I didn't answer. What could I say? That every corner of this house still breathes with memories? That I talk to Caroline sometimes in the hallway when I think no one can hear? That I know exactly which step creaks and where the sunlight hits the floor at 3 p.m. in autumn? A smaller place would be cheaper, yes, easier to clean, but it wouldn't be mine. It wouldn't be ours. My only real company these days is my car, a 1998 Ford Taurus, light blue, a little rust on the bumper, but she still runs like a charm. Caroline hated that car. She used to call it the stubborn mule, because it stalled once on the freeway coming back from her sister's house. I refused to get rid of it. In a strange way, it became part of me. Driving that car is one of the few things that still makes me feel like a person. I don't go far, just the grocery store, the post office, the occasional drive around the lake. But behind the wheel, I'm not some old man waiting to be filed away. I am Edward Mulligan, homeowner, taxpayer, war veteran, father, husband, someone who still has a say in how his life is lived. A few months ago, I got a letter from the county saying the property taxes were going up. I wasn't worried. I have savings. Carolyn and I were always careful with money. We never had much, but we made it work. I have a pension from my years working logistics at the paper mill and a small life insurance policy Caroline left behind. Still, there was something in Alex's tone lately, something pressing, urgent. Dad, do you have a will? Have you thought about long-term care? I know what those words mean. They're the same ones people say when they're trying to gently nudge you out of your own life. The neighborhood's changed, too. The houses are the same, but the people are different. Most of my old neighbors have either died or moved into retirement communities. Young couples live next door now, with their energy-efficient strollers and protein smoothies and earbuds always in. They nod at me, sometimes, but they don't ask my name. I've become part of the scenery, a harmless ghost in a clean flannel shirt. Sometimes I wonder what it's all for. What's the end game? You spend your life raising a family, paying taxes, keeping the lawn trimmed, showing up every day to a job that rarely thanks you. And for what? To be left behind like an old umbrella in the back seat. Useful once, now forgotten. Carolyn used to say, "When you get old, you become invisible." I didn't understand her then. I thought she meant physically. But it's deeper than that. You become invisible in the eyes of the people who once saw you as the whole world. That's the part no one prepares you for. And yet, I get up every morning. I get dressed. I brush my teeth. I pull the Taurus out of the driveway and wave to no one. I pretend I'm still part of something. That maybe, somehow, the story isn't over. That maybe, just maybe, someone out there remembers me as more than a burden. Or maybe I just keep going because there's nothing else to do. Because that's what Caroline would have done. Because even when no one's watching, dignity still matters. That's who I am. That's where this all begins. An old man with a fading voice, a rusting car, and a heart that still hopes, stupidly, stubbornly, hopefully, that someone might still care. It was a Tuesday morning when the phone rang, jarring the silence like a fork scraping porcelain. I had just finished my coffee, the usual lukewarm mug I nursed more out of habit than need. The caller ID flashed. Alexander Mulligan. My son. The name still gave me a flicker of something, though I had trained myself not to expect much from his calls anymore. I picked up after the second ring, hoping he wouldn't hear the small shake of eagerness in my voice. "Hey, Dad," he said, his tone unusually cheerful, almost artificial, like the voice you use when you're calling a client you don't really like, but need something from. I greeted him warmly, cautiously, waiting for the request. But instead, he said something unexpected. Jenna and I were talking. We thought maybe we'd come pick you up this weekend and go for a little drive. Just the three of us. Sort of a mini road trip. I didn't respond at first. It had been years since Alex offered anything resembling quality time. The last time we spent more than 20 minutes together was at Caroline's memorial service. And even then, he left early, citing a client emergency. Now he wanted a drive? A drive? I asked, trying not to let the suspicion bleed into my voice. "Yeah, we thought you could use a change of scenery," he said. "We'll take you somewhere nice. There's a nature preserve a few hours south, supposed to be beautiful this time of year. Good air, trees, a lake." You'd love it, I could hear Jenna in the background, saying something I couldn't make out, followed by Alex muting the phone for a few seconds. When he came back on, his voice had softened. "We miss you, Dad. We want to spend time together." Something about that sentence cracked something open in me. Maybe it was the simplicity of it, or maybe I was just too hungry for connection to question it properly. I agreed before I even realized what I was saying. "That sounds nice," I replied. "It's been a while." "Great," he said. "We'll pick you up Saturday morning. Be ready around 9. Pack light. Just a few things for the day. We'll be back by nightfall." I hung up and stared at the phone in my hand for a long moment. The air in the house seemed to shift. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt something stir inside me that wasn't just routine or resignation. I felt anticipation, something almost like hope. Saturday came quickly. I woke up at 5, unable to sleep any longer. I laid out my clothes carefully, ironed my slacks, polished my shoes. I packed a small duffel with a sweater, a bottle of water, my wallet, some aspirin, and the paperback I was reading for the 3rd time. At 8:45 I was already waiting on the porch, the cool morning breeze ruffling the collar of my jacket. At 9:12, a sleek black SUV rolled into the driveway. Jenna was driving. She gave a tight-lipped smile as she got out and opened the back door. "Hey, Edward," she said, using my name like always. Never Dad. That was a title she reserved for her own father, who apparently played golf in Florida and sent money when needed. "Nice day for a drive, huh?" she added, her voice chipper but hollow. Alex got out on the passenger side, sunglasses still on despite the overcast sky. He hugged me, quick, one-armed, more a gesture of form than feeling, and said, "You ready?" I nodded, trying to hide how strange it felt to be asked that. "Got everything?" Jenna added. "Yeah," I said, patting my duffel. "Wallet, meds, glasses." She smiled again, tighter this time. "Perfect. Hop in. We'll be quick." She paused. "Just need to stop at the store on the way out of town." We pulled into the parking lot of a large shopping center 20 minutes later. I didn't question it. They said they needed snacks, drinks for the drive, maybe gas. Jenna parked near the front of the store, turned off the engine, and unbuckled her seatbelt. Alex turned around from the front seat and smiled at me. "Just stay here, Dad. We'll be real quick." I nodded, unbothered. I was comfortable in the car. It was warm. I had my book. I watched them get out and walk into the building. Jenna had left the keys in the ignition. I sat there watching the storefront windows reflect the dull Ohio sky, flipping pages absent-mindedly. After 15 minutes, I glanced at my watch. Nothing unusual. Big stores take time. Another 10 minutes passed. I looked up. Still no sign of them. I got out, stretched my legs, peered toward the entrance. Maybe they were waiting in line. Maybe they ran into someone. I paced a bit, walked toward the automatic doors, let them slide open. I entered the store and walked up and down a few aisles. No Alex, no Jenna. I checked the drinks aisle, the snacks, the registers. I even asked one of the clerks if they had seen a tall man in a navy coat and a woman with red hair and designer sunglasses. The clerk shook her head. I went back to the car, unsure of what to do. My stomach had begun to knot, the kind of slow, creeping unease that starts somewhere behind the ribs and climbs upward toward the throat. I waited. Another 20 minutes. Then 40. The car sat there idling, the keys still dangling from the ignition. I tried calling Alex, straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same. Jenna's number rang twice, then cut off. That's when something inside me clicked. Not panic, not yet, but a sharp, instinctive tightening. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew it wasn't right. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't overreacting. I sat behind the wheel, staring out at the parking lot, the idle car humming beneath me. Then, without fully thinking it through, I put the car into gear. My hands were shaking, my foot tentative on the pedal, but the moment the tires rolled forward, I felt something else rise up in me, something old, buried, but still alive. I drove out of that parking lot slowly at first, watching the rearview mirror as if expecting to see them come running, waving their arms. They didn't. I turned onto the main road. My chest was tight, my mouth dry. I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew I needed to move, to get away. The GPS on the dash blinked uselessly. I knew the way home by heart. I drove in silence, the weight of confusion settling over me like a coat I didn't remember putting on. What kind of people leave someone like that? What kind of son tells you he wants to spend time with you, then vanishes without a word? I gripped the wheel tighter. Caroline's voice echoed somewhere in the back of my head. People show you who they are in how they leave. I didn't know if this was abandonment, a prank, an accident, or something worse. But I knew I was alone. Again. And this time, it wasn't just neglect. It was something intentional, deliberate. When I pulled into my driveway, the house looked the same, but it no longer felt like shelter. I sat in the car for a long time, the engine ticking as it cooled, my thoughts louder than the world around me. There was a reason they left me. I just didn't know what it was yet. But I would find out, and whatever it was, I felt the first sharp edge of something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Resolve. The house was cold when I stepped inside, though the thermostat claimed it was 72 degrees. I stood in the entryway for a moment, keys still in hand, as if waiting for something to make sense. My heart was still thudding with the kind of slow, deliberate rhythm that made me feel strangely hollow. I couldn't quite believe what had just happened. I couldn't quite understand it either. I had always imagined betrayal to be something loud, something final, maybe a slammed door or a shouting match. But this was quieter, more deliberate. A silence left in your lap like a gift you didn't want and couldn't return. I took off my coat, placed it on the hook by the door, and sat down in the old recliner that Caroline had always hated but never replaced. I stared out the window for a long time. My hands were still shaking. I'd always thought I was too old to be surprised anymore, but I hadn't expected this. What had just occurred didn't seem like an accident. It didn't feel like someone getting lost in the aisles of a big box store. This had been coordinated, managed, decided. They'd told me to stay in the car and left the keys in the ignition. Who does that unless they want you to leave? Unless they're setting the stage for something they've already written in their heads? The phone didn't ring that night. I left it beside me just in case, and even turned the ringer up a notch. Nothing. No text, no missed calls, not even one of those vapid emoji-filled messages Jenna sometimes sent when she needed to pretend to be nice. I tried calling Alex again. Still voicemail. Around midnight, I called the store and asked if anyone had found a tall man and red-haired woman wandering around looking for someone. The clerk, a different one this time, said they had no reports of anything unusual. I thanked her, hung up, and sat staring at the phone like it might confess something to me. The next morning, I woke up stiff and aching, having fallen asleep in the recliner. My back hurt. My neck was twisted. But I didn't move for a long time. I sat there thinking about what had happened and what hadn't. They hadn't called the police. They hadn't reported me missing. No one came to my door. No one knocked. They hadn't even made a token effort to retrieve the car, or me. It was as if I had simply evaporated. As if I had never been there at all. I made myself a cup of coffee, but the taste was off. Everything tasted off. I looked around the kitchen, that tired old space with its outdated linoleum and fading wallpaper, and wondered if I'd been blind to something for years. Maybe they had never cared. Maybe the calls, the rare visits, the hollow smiles were all part of a script they'd been phoning in until they didn't have to anymore. I thought about Jenna's voice when she told me to stay in the car. Sweet, casual, calculated. It was like watching someone tie a bow on a box you already know holds something rotten. 2 days passed. Still no word. On the third morning, I drove myself to the grocery store. Not because I needed anything, but because I needed to see if anyone would treat me like I was still part of the world. The cashier, Ruthie, smiled at me and asked if I'd seen the local high school parade last weekend. I lied and said yes. Her smile was genuine. I wanted to tell her everything, unload this strange knot of betrayal that was blooming in my chest like a bruise. But I didn't. Who would believe me? That my son and his wife had lured me into a car, driven me to a parking lot, and vanished. Back home, I did something I hadn't done in years. I dug through the filing cabinet in my bedroom closet, the one with our old tax returns, mortgage papers, Caroline's death certificate, and found the manila folder labeled Alex. Inside were the documents I'd signed when I'd agreed to help him, and Jenna buy their house 3 years ago. At the time, I thought I was doing what any good father would do. They needed help with a down payment. I had the money. I wasn't using it. Caroline would have wanted them to have a nice place. They said I'd be listed as a co-borrower, just for credit reasons. Alex had said, waving it off. You won't be on the hook for anything. It's just paperwork, but now, with my glasses balanced low on my nose and my hands trembling slightly, I read through the documents for real. Not just the signature pages, the actual legal language. And what I saw made my stomach drop. I wasn't just a co-borrower, I was a partial owner. My name wasn't tacked on as an emergency contact, it was embedded in the property's deed. That house, at least a third of it, was legally mine. A sudden chill ran through me. If that was true, why had I never set foot inside it since the closing? Why had they never invited me over? Why did they keep me at arm's length except when they needed money? Something was wrong. Something had been wrong for a long time, and I'd just been too lonely or too trusting to see it. I picked up the phone and called Martin Whitlow, the lawyer who handled Caroline's estate. He was semi-retired now, but I knew he still kept an office above the hardware store downtown. I told him I needed a favor. Something quick, something unofficial. I just needed him to take a look at some documents. We met the next day. He read through the papers quietly, frowning only once near the end. Then he looked up and said, Edward, you didn't just help them get a mortgage. You're listed as a co-owner, joint tenancy with rights of survivorship. If you die, your share goes to them automatically. But until then, you have a third of the house. I stared at him, heart hammering. Can they sell it without me? He shook his head. Not unless you give them power of attorney, which... He paused. You didn't. Did you? I thought back. 6 months ago, Alex had brought me a stack of forms, said they were medical releases, so Jenna could help manage doctor appointments. I had signed them all. Had I really been that careless? I suddenly felt dizzy. Martin offered to review those forms too, just in case. I went home and spent the rest of the day digging through drawers, folders, boxes. I found a pink envelope Jenna had given me, labeled just-in-case paperwork. Inside were 6 signed forms, 2 of which granted them medical proxy rights, and one that looked suspiciously like a financial power of attorney. I brought it back to Martin the next morning. His face was grave by the time he finished reading. This gives them broad financial authority, he said quietly. They can access your bank accounts, move money, even sell property unless you revoke it. I felt like someone had poured cold water down my spine. They tricked me, I whispered. They planned this. He nodded slowly. Looks that way. And in that moment, everything clicked. The trip, the parking lot, the disappearing act. They'd hoped I'd panic, maybe get lost, maybe even call the police. If I ended up confused or disoriented in some hospital, it would only help their case. Look, he can't live alone. Look, he's not well. And then, maybe, they'd invoke the power of attorney, take control, clean out the accounts, sell the house, and lock me away somewhere, quiet and permanent. But I hadn't panicked. I hadn't called for help. I had driven home. And now, I knew. I wasn't just old. I wasn't just a burden. I was an obstacle, one they wanted to remove. Not with malice, with calculation, with quiet, smothering strategy. The worst part wasn't that they'd planned it. The worst part was that they thought I wouldn't notice. For the first time in years, I couldn't sleep. Not the usual kind of sleeplessness that comes with age, the kind where your bladder wakes you up at 4 in the morning or your joints ache against the mattress. No, this was the kind that pulled your eyelids open and left you staring at the ceiling, your mind racing like a film reel you can't pause. I laid there in the dark, reliving every interaction, every phone call, every casual conversation with Alex and Jenna over the past 5 years, and I saw it all differently now. The little things, the sudden increase in calls asking about my health, the nudges about getting my affairs in order, the questions about passwords and pensions, they weren't innocent. They were a slow, careful campaign. I got up and stood at the kitchen sink, looking out the window into the backyard, where the outline of Caroline's rose bushes sat in black silhouette against the morning mist. She had planted them with such care. Every spring, she would prune them like they were ancient relics, whispering to them as though they could hear her. When she died, I promised myself I'd keep them alive. I tried. I really did. But this past year, they began to wither no matter what I did. I thought maybe it was just time, just nature. But now, staring out at their skeletal remains, I felt something twist in me. What if I was withering too, not because it was time, but because someone had slowly, patiently drained the life from me? I called my bank that morning and asked for a list of recent transactions. The clerk on the phone hesitated, asked security questions, and finally read off a few entries. One of them stopped me cold. A $4,000 wire transfer initiated 2 weeks prior to a private account in Jenna's name. I hadn't authorized it. I asked for a copy of the paperwork. When it arrived 2 days later, I saw my signature at the bottom, except I hadn't signed anything. It was a forgery, a sloppy one at that. The loops were wrong. The slope of the E in Edward was too sharp. Caroline would have noticed it in a second. She had always been the detail person. I took the document to Martin, who confirmed my suspicion. "This is fraudulent," he said simply. "Do you want to file a complaint?" I shook my head. Not yet. There was no point firing a shot if I didn't know where the enemy was standing. I needed more information. I needed proof, not just of the financial manipulation, but of the intent behind it, because part of me still wanted to believe this wasn't deliberate, that maybe Alex and Jenna were just clumsy, thoughtless, misguided. But then the letter came. It arrived on a Thursday in a plain white envelope. No return address, just my name written in Jenna's precise, slanted handwriting. Inside was a typed letter, 3 paragraphs, cold, formal, distant. They were concerned about my mental state. They had spoken to a specialist, someone unnamed, who believed I was showing early signs of cognitive decline. They believed it was in my best interest to begin discussing long-term residential care options. They offered to help with the logistics. They said they'd already toured a few places. I sat at the kitchen table with the letter in my hand, the same kitchen table where Caroline once laughed over crossword puzzles and where Alex used to sit cross-legged, eating cereal out of the box. I reread the letter 4 times. I even read it aloud once, thinking maybe the words would sound different if I spoke them. They didn't. They sounded worse. That night, I had a dream. In it, Carolyn was standing at the edge of our driveway, waving to me with her gardening gloves still on, her mouth forming words I couldn't hear. I was sitting in the passenger seat of the Taurus, and Alex was behind the wheel, his face blank. Jenna was in the back, whispering something into a phone. The car was moving, slowly at first, then faster. I tried to open the door, but it was locked. I tried to shout, but my voice made no sound. Caroline grew smaller and smaller in the mirror until she vanished entirely. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat, the sheets twisted around my legs like restraints. The next morning, I made a decision. I wasn't going to wait to be erased. I wasn't going to sit quietly while the people I trusted most rewrote the terms of my life. I made a list, a real one, on paper, just like Caroline used to do when she was planning Thanksgiving dinner. First, I would change my will. I would remove Alex as executor. I would designate Martin instead. Second, I would revoke the power of attorney. Third, I would transfer the title of my house into a trust, one that couldn't be tampered with or sold without my consent. Fourth, I would find out what other assets they might be circling around, like vultures waiting for the old dog to drop. I spent the day making calls, setting appointments, gathering documents. It felt strange to be busy again, to have a purpose that wasn't just survival. For so long, I had let inertia win. I had let loneliness shape my decisions. I had let love blind me to cruelty. But now, something had shifted. The fog was gone. I saw clearly, and what I saw was not a son and daughter-in-law looking out for an aging father, but two people who had decided I was no longer useful, except as a financial instrument. The next day I received another letter, this one from a law firm. It was signed by someone named Mitchell Klein, a probate and elder law specialist. The letter was a formal notification that Alex and Jenna were petitioning for a conservatorship. They were asking the court to declare me mentally unfit to manage my affairs. They were requesting emergency powers to oversee my medical care, my finances, and the disposition of my estate. It was, as the letter claimed, in response to increasingly erratic behavior and signs of diminished capacity. I took the letter and sat down slowly, heart racing. They weren't waiting for me to get confused or disoriented. They were manufacturing the confusion. They were documenting behaviors they had orchestrated, leaving me in parking lots, isolating me, fabricating missed medications. I felt my breath catch in my chest. This wasn't neglect. This wasn't cruelty born of emotional distance. This was strategy. Cold, careful strategy. I called Martin, who insisted I come over immediately. We sat in his office, the windows fogged from the sudden rain outside, and I handed him the letter. He read it carefully, then looked at me with something like fury in his eyes. "We'll fight this," he said. "But you need to understand, Edward, this is serious. If they succeed, they'll have control over everything. You'll be locked out of your accounts, your property, your medical decisions." Everything. I nodded. "Then we don't let them succeed." And just like that, I had crossed an invisible line, one I hadn't even known existed. I was no longer defending my independence, I was preparing for war. The realization that I was under siege transformed every ordinary moment into something sharp-edged and fraught, each memory reconfigured as either evidence or warning sign. And I felt both older and more alert than I had in years, as though the slow machinery of betrayal had jolted me awake. I spent the next few days in a silent fury, barely sleeping, barely eating, my heart hammered by the sense that the world I had always known was quietly being dismantled behind my back. I found myself replaying conversations from weeks ago, analyzing how Alex had said something offhand about helping me remember things, or checking in, as if they were rehearsed lines, the prelude to a performance intended to convince someone, watching from afar, that I had become unreliable. I recalled Jenna's smile in the store the day they left me in the car, the cool way she'd said, "We'll be quick," as though speed mattered more than my presence, as though my waiting was incidental. Those smiles, those little words, they transformed overnight into signifiers, proof that things had always been wrong, and I had been too lonely or distracted to notice. Against that backdrop, I began to act. The first thing I did was reach out to Carla, my neighbor from 2 doors down, the woman who had once taught 3rd grade and knew me as Edward, not elder or retirement risk. I hadn't seen her in months, because I'd started seeing her as a reminder that my life was changing, and I wasn't ready for that. But now, I needed her. I knocked on her door one evening at sunset, carrying a small casserole and the stiffness that comes from nerves nobody expects from a 76-year-old man. And when she answered, I saw surprise flash in her eyes, but also something warmer, recognition, solidarity. She invited me inside, and I confessed in half sentences, interrupting myself with apologies and tears, that I felt trapped, manipulated, that the people I loved had put me in a situation I resisted and could barely describe. She didn't flinch. She listened. She brought me tea, and when I described the forged documents, the missing money, the unexplained letters and legal threats, she folded her hands tightly on the table and said, "You're not imagining this. This is hard, but it's real, and you're not alone." That night, I felt in my bones the weight of what was happening. This wasn't just a fight for my property or my savings. This was a fight for my identity, for the story of my life. And in that fight, I couldn't stand alone. In the days that followed, I worked with Martin on a plan that felt tactical and precise, designed to dismantle the slowly creeping dam that threatened to drown me in legal and emotional isolation. Martin filed paperwork immediately to rescind the power of attorney, to petition the court to suspend any actions on the power of attorney that might have already been used by Alex or Jenna, and to submit evidence of the forged signature and unauthorized funds transfer, plus the unreported wills discussion. It was a messy, acrid defeat of trust laid bare in black and white, affidavits and legal forms, but I believed it to be necessary. The notion that your child would file for conservatorship against you, their own father, felt obscene and surreal. Yet the courts took it seriously, and so did I. At the same time, I worked to reinforce my own defenses. I closed my bank accounts and opened new ones, redirecting my pension deposits and setting up alerts I could see, but no one else, every time a transaction was attempted. I changed the locks on the doors and had a small digital safe installed in the bedroom to hold my legal documents, my savings, my passports. I installed a small security camera by the front door, not to spy on Alex or Jenna. They hadn't been here, thank God, but to send a message. I was paying attention now. Emotionally, I felt myself moving into a fierce clarity that bordered on grief. I grieved the realization that the son who once ran into my arms had become someone capable of calculated deceptions, of exploitation as gentle as a closed door. But beneath the grief was a steely line of resolve. Caroline's voice returned, quieter, but clearer than it had been in years. When they do this, they show you who they are. I repeated it under the bathroom light when I brushed my teeth, under the humming glow of the porch when I drank a glass of water in the night. I repeated it until it became a banner under which I camped, a mantra of self-preservation and exposure. I arranged a meeting at Martin's office with an elder care counsellor and a forensic accountant, both of whom had kindly offered to help when I called. At that meeting, I sat at a table surrounded by people who spoke legalese and numbers, who seemed to see me as a client, not a problem. They projected graphs showing the timeline of withdrawals, letters, legal filings, and pointed out how each corresponded to visits or requests I hadn't understood. The charts were dry, but for me, they were a lifeline. Evidence is proof. Proof is power. I saw it in each line, each figure, each date I'd logged by hand. On the evening I left that office, I opened the front door to find Alex standing there, his face as composed as ever. He said, "Dad, can we talk?" I told him to come in, but only for a minute, or he could talk here. Silence pressed between us like a weight, and I watched his face for signs of remorse or fear. He looked blank, polite, calculated. I asked him why they had done this. By phone, by a single question. But he deflected. He said they were worried, concerned for my health, only doing what they thought was best. I told him I had copies of every document, transcripts of conversations, bank statements, legal filings, all collected and labeled. I told him I had witnesses. I told him I was not going anywhere. He nodded, still blank, then turned and walked into the night. Behind him, my door clicked in its new lock. I called out for him to wait, but he was already gone. I shut the door. I sat down in the hallway, breathing, thinking, this is war, but not the kind with bombs or guns. This was the war of exposure, of truth, of endurance. And I was not surrendering. That night, I lay awake thinking of Caroline in the garden, of the rasp of her voice naming every petal, every weed, every shape of root she prodded. I thought of the rose bushes, the chairs in the living room, the creak in the hallway. They were mine. They were part of me. And no petition, no forged pen, no silent removal would take them without a fight. I had crossed a threshold. In that threshold lay all the fear of aging, the raw edge of betrayal, the cold calculus of law, but also the fierce, desperate ember of a man claiming his own life back. And in that ember, I found a clarity and a purpose I had feared the world had already extinguished. The morning I decided to make the final move, the sky was the color of dull pewter, and the wind had that brittle edge that told you autumn wasn't far off. I had slept poorly again. My dreams thick with images of keys turning in locks that weren't mine, of signatures in my handwriting approving things I never wanted, of Caroline's voice fading into the static of a disconnected phone call. But when I sat at the edge of my bed and stared at the floorboards, I knew I couldn't delay any longer. I had to do something irreversible, something that wouldn't just block their next attempt, but would reroute the entire course of this campaign they'd launched against me. I wasn't going to wait until they came back with more lawyers, more accusations, more letters of concern. I was going to answer them with action. Martin had already drawn up the necessary documents, and they sat in a folder on my kitchen table next to my coffee cup, neat and orderly, waiting for my signature. These papers didn't just revoke power of attorney. They began the process of transferring my assets into a private trust, one they had no access to, one protected by layers of legal distance they couldn't breach without my permission or my death. The trust would manage my finances, designate charitable beneficiaries, and shield the house from forced sale or transfer. It was the kind of move that sent a message: I am not helpless. I am not confused. I am not yours to manipulate. Before heading to Martin's office, I stopped by the bank, where Eleanor, the same manager who had handled my accounts for 20 years, greeted me with a look of startled concern. She had received a call, she said, from someone claiming to be acting on my behalf. A man, younger, said I was experiencing confusion, requested access to my accounts for review, said he was my financial caregiver. I asked if he gave a name. Alex Mulligan, she replied carefully. My hands were cold. I asked if any information had been given. She said no. She had refused. But she had been planning to call me to confirm. I nodded, thanked her, and sat down in her office. In the next hour, we closed my checking and savings accounts, transferred the balances into new accounts under the name of the trust, and flagged any attempts at access from third parties. I watched her type each field in with clinical precision. When she finished, she reached across the desk and touched my hand. I'm sorry, Edward, she said softly. I've seen this kind of thing before. It never gets easier. At Martin's, the final paperwork was waiting. He slid the folder toward me, a pen resting in the crease. All you have to do is sign, he said. Once this is done, they can't touch a thing. I hesitated only for a second. Then I picked up the pen and signed my name with a firmness I hadn't felt in years. With each stroke of ink I felt something in me harden, not bitterness but clarity. When it was done, Martin shook my hand and smiled. Not the congratulatory smile of victory, but the weary, respectful smile of someone who understands what it means to defend your dignity. That evening, as the sun was beginning to set, the knock came at my door. I had half expected it all day, had even brewed extra coffee in case they came with another plea or performance, but when I opened the door and saw Alex standing there, not alone this time, but with Jenna beside him, I felt the full gravity of what I had done. They both looked different, not casual, not calculating. They looked desperate. Jenna's lipstick was smudged, her hair pulled back into a hasty bun, and Alex's shirt was wrinkled, as though he'd been sleeping in his clothes. They stood on my porch like strangers who had once lived in a dream I barely remembered. "We need to talk," Alex said. I nodded and let them in. We sat in the living room, and I noticed how they avoided looking at the photos on the mantel. Caroline in her garden, young Alex with a gap-toothed grin, the three of us at the Grand Canyon. Instead, their eyes darted around the room like there was something toxic in the air. I waited for them to speak first. Jenna finally broke the silence. "We're sorry," she said flatly. "We were scared. You've been so isolated. You don't answer our messages." I stared at her. "You left me in a parking lot," I said. "You forged my signature. You tried to have me declared incompetent." Her face twitched. "We didn't mean for it to go that far." Alex leaned forward. "Dad, please!" "We just wanted to help. You were forgetting things. You seemed confused. We thought—" "You thought," I interrupted, "that if you made me look weak enough, you could take control, not help. Control." My voice was steady, but my hands were shaking. There was a long pause. Then Jenna looked up at me, her voice colder now. "So what's your plan, Edward? Just pretend like none of this happened? Make us the villains? Destroy your relationship with your son?" I shook my head slowly. "I didn't destroy anything. You made your choices. You tried to take something that wasn't yours. I'm simply taking it back." Alex looked stricken, but I saw something behind his eyes. Not regret, fear, not of me, of what I might do next. "I've transferred everything," I said. "You have no access. The house is secured. The money is gone to you. And if you attempt anything else, I'll press charges. I have documentation, witnesses, sworn statements." Jenna stood up abruptly. "You're being cruel," she snapped. "Do you know how this makes us look? Do you have any idea what people will say?" I looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," I said. "They'll say an old man got tired of being used." Alex stood slowly, his face pale. "We didn't want it to end this way." "Neither did I," I replied. "But you left me no choice." They left without another word. I watched them get into their car and drive away, their tail lights disappearing into the dusk. For a long time, I just stood there, the house silent around me. Then I sat in Caroline's old chair, folded my hands, and looked out the window into the dark. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. What I felt was cleaner, quieter, like rain washing off old dust. I had reclaimed my name, my home, my life. And even if there was no applause, no reconciliation, I knew something unshakable had returned to me. The right to decide how my story ends. In the weeks that followed their final visit, the house settled into a kind of silence I hadn't known before. Not the oppressive stillness of abandonment, or the muffled quiet that used to hang in the air after Caroline died, but a clean, deliberate silence, the kind that follows decision. I no longer looked out the window expecting to see a car pull up. I stopped checking my phone for messages that didn't come. Something inside me had shifted. Not violently, not with fanfare, but like the slow moving of stone after an earthquake has passed. There had been damage, yes, but also the possibility of new ground. I went back to my routines, not as rituals of survival, but as expressions of control. My days belonged to me again. I made coffee because I liked the smell. I watered the rose bushes not because Caroline had asked me to, but because I had remembered how much life had once existed in those petals. I drove to the lake once a week and sat by the water in my Taurus, reading in the quiet until the sky turned gold and violet. I wasn't waiting anymore, for calls, for apologies, for permission. I had made my choice, and it held. One day, maybe a month later, I received a letter. Not a formal one, not typed. It was written in Alex's handwriting, uneven and rushed. It said he was sorry. It said things had gotten out of hand. He claimed he didn't know what Jenna had planned. He said he felt caught in the middle, that he had never intended to hurt me, that he missed the way things used to be. There was no mention of undoing what they'd tried to do, no suggestion of restitution. Just soft words, old memories, and a vague wish to reconnect. I folded the letter carefully, placed it in a drawer with the others, the legal filings, the bank documents, the letters from the law firm, and closed it. I didn't respond, not because I hated him, not because I wanted to punish him, but because the letter asked me to meet him somewhere I no longer lived. The version of me who would have replied to that kind of appeal had died the moment they chose silence over truth in that parking lot. I saw Jenna once more, purely by accident. She was standing outside a pharmacy when I came to pick up my prescription. She looked thinner, pale, distracted. We made eye contact. She looked away first. I walked past her without slowing down, not out of malice, but because there was no reason to stop. She was no longer someone I recognized. Martin called me the day the court officially denied their petition for conservatorship. The judge had reviewed the documents, the signatures, the evidence of misrepresentation. The case was dismissed with prejudice, which meant they couldn't bring it again. Martin sounded relieved, but I didn't feel any surge of victory, just a quiet release, like exhaling after holding your breath too long. I thanked him, then sat on my porch in the fading light, listening to the creak of the swing and the chirping of late summer insects. There had been a battle, yes, but I had made it through intact, and that counted for something. Eventually I revised my will again. I removed Alex entirely. I left the house to a local organization that builds housing for low-income seniors. I donated my savings to the hospice center that had taken such good care of Caroline in her final days. I included a note in the will, handwritten, not legal, not binding, just a message to anyone who might one day read it. Let no one take from you the quiet parts of your life. They are worth defending. That was all. Life went on, not grandly, not dramatically, but in small, steady rhythms that I finally understood to be peace. I was still alone, but not lonely. I had made room in my life for memory, for small joys, for self-respect. And though the wound left by betrayal never truly healed, it no longer bled. It simply sat there, a scar, a reminder. I carried it the way you carry your name. Something earned, something known, something true. And now, when I drive past that parking lot where they once left me, I don't feel anger. I feel clarity. I see the place not as the site of my humiliation, but as the point at which I began again. Because sometimes, the moment they try to write you out of your own story is the exact moment you realize it still belongs to you.